Are we going to see Darryn Peterson versus Princeton in KU's final tune-up before their Duke game?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network your number one sports podcast network. On today's edition of LOJ, we're talking a little Darryn Peterson. We're talking a little KU basketball preview against Princeton. We're getting into the Princeton scouting report, players to watch, matchups of the game, areas KU could be tested as their final tune-up before the Champions Classic and the Duke game. Let's start right there with the Darryn Peterson stuff, because this will be very interesting to me if he plays or not in this game. Obviously, from a standpoint of where things are at right now, it feels like he hasn't played in the less meaningful games. But then again, he did play in the Green Bay game, right? Is it more of an every other game? Is it more of a load management thing? And this would be the one that you'd want to, you'd rather play in this one that's closer to the Duke game to get you back in tune before the Duke game, as opposed to, shaking the rust off. Now, is the injury serious? If he misses this game, the conversation around the injury becomes more of a thing. If he misses this game and plays in the Duke game, then it definitely feels like load management. If he misses this game and misses the Duke game, then you start getting into the conversation of, could this be a multi-week thing? Again, we went over some of the calf strain stuff, like it could be a day-to-day thing. It could be something that is 6 to 8 weeks. It just depends on the severity of the hamstring strain. It just kind of depends on the severity there, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see if he does play or not in terms of the future of the season for KU basketball and what it means for Darryn Peterson. Outside of that, the importance of this game for KU, I think it is kind of continuing to establish chemistry and continuity with each other, and that's why it is important that if he can go, he does. Obviously, if he is feeling it and hurt, you don't want him to risk it in a game like this. You'd rather him be healthy long term. But if it is something where, it was more load management, then yes, you want him to play, because these are the types of games where you have a wider margin for error to make mistakes and get used to playing with each other and playing with different lineups and playing with different teammates in real game situations to establish that on-court chemistry that's going to matter. It's compared to the NBA season, college basketball season is a sprint with how little games comparatively that it does have. You're getting 2 games a week as opposed to maybe 3 or 4 a week. And so I think continuing to establish those things, ideally you lead to some sort of chemistry or momentum that carries into that Duke game on Tuesday night against the Blue Devils. That would be certainly nice, but, continuing to gain confidence for guys, right? Like as we look for Kohl Rosario, he just had his breakout game, but a breakout game is only as good as your next game. And the biggest thing with young players is sometimes consistency. So, Kohl Rosario having another good game would go a long way in establishing consistency, which is where the real value is, right? Of having the strong season. It's, can you consistently do it, right? I think the next importance of the game, the thing about it is playing against an Ivy League opponent, it really can be a good test for the NCAA tournament. Let's say KU ends up as a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. Most likely, like a lot of times the winner of the Ivy League, they're getting a 12 or a 13 or a 14 seed, right? They're a lot of times in that range. I know Princeton made that run as a 15 seed a couple of years ago, but a lot of times that can be the case. A lot of times the Ivy League is putting forth a team that has a chance to win a game or two in the NCAA tournament. And so playing a game like this, it could be important come NCAA tournament time, right? It could be a team that ends up in the field. It could be a team that, it just gives you the idea of what playing an Ivy League school and their kind of motion offenses and cutting offenses wants to do for later in the season. But I think the top storylines coming into this, like number one, again, we go back to the Darryn Peterson stuff, which we just touched on. We don't need to again. The other one is here's just a little bit of, I guess, fun trivia. Do you know what KU's record all time is against Princeton? They've only played twice, actually. I know KU's played, seems like they're playing a different Ivy League school every year now, right? Whether it was Cornell in the late 2000s or Harvard's been kind of the recent one for KU. They played Penn in the NCAA tournament as the best 16 seed in 2018. But Kansas is 2-0 all time against Princeton. And maybe here's a little bit of good juju for KU. The last time they played was 2001, and KU won that game 78-62. Obviously, it was that win for those 2001 to 2002 Jayhawks that propelled that team to being unbeaten in Big 12 play and making a Final Four. Without that Princeton win in 2001, I don't know if they would have got either of those things done. So you hope for some similar energy and carryover this go around if you can beat Princeton to what happened last time in the 2001 to 2002 season. All right, let's get on to our Princeton scouting report. We'll get to our players to watch for both teams, as well as our matchups of the game and more. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the show. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, and we're brought to you by DoorDash. It is almost the weekend. Let's look back and crown this week's MVP on who delivered. Powered by DoorDash, just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Kansas, we're going to go with, I guess we'll go to the basketball. I was like, do we go basketball? Do we go football? We're going to go Kohl Rosario, delivered in a big way earlier this week. He had 16 points that led KU in scoring. He just didn't seem to hesitate. He just was going after it. He seemed like a much more confident player, and we've kind of been waiting for that breakout moment for Kohl Rosario. It felt like he delivered that, but can he back it up this next game? Either way, he did deliver for Kansas earlier this week against Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And just like DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday, keep the streak alive, fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply, promo period through November 18th. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Again, you can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Okay, so Princeton comes in 1-1 on the season against Division I competition. The reason I say Division I competition, actually, as of time of recording here, they are playing against a Division II team called John Jay. Actually, it looks like it just went final. John Jay, they won 100-59. So impressive effort for Princeton, where they shot 60% on twos, 38% on threes, 88% at the foul line. They grabbed 18 offensive rebounds. The other team only grabbed 19 defensive rebounds, and they only had 9 turnovers. About as impressive as a performance as you could imagine for Princeton. But again, you would expect that against them. So anyway, they're 2-1 on the season overall, but 1-1 against D1 competition. Last year, Princeton went 19-11 on the season, and that was actually the first year that they underperformed their preseason KenPom rank since 2021. They went 24-5 the year before, and then they made it to the Sweet 16 the year before that. If you remember, they were the 15 seed that they beat Arizona in the first round, and then the one that people probably here remember even more, they beat Missouri in the second round. But it's still the same coach as then with Mitch Henderson. They are just outside the top 200 on both KenPom and Bart Torvik. They lost both of their star guards. One of them is redshirting this year so that he can transfer next year. And then Xavier Lee, although he might have graduated, you just don't get like a graduate year at the Ivy League. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but he goes to Florida. So losing some good guards there. Still, Basket under review picked them second in the Ivy League, which, as we talked about earlier, like the Ivy League is a team that typically puts together one of the better opportunities for a mid-major school to upset a high major school. So, that does become at least a little bit interesting to me. You look at the 4 strengths for Princeton. Number 1 is defensive rebounding. They have been top 60 nationally so far this year in defensive rebounding. So they've been solid at it. Small sample size, but still, here's the big thing though. Last year, they were top 5 in the country in defensive rebounding rate. And it was their 4th straight season of a top 30 defensive rebound rate nationally. This isn't, going to be your biggest team in the world, but a lot of times defensive rebounding, it can come down to having good positioning, having good effort, having good strength, having a good idea of like angles and where the ball is going to come off. And it seems like whatever Mitch Henderson is teaching and running the scheme-wise there, he's doing a great job on the defensive glass, where they've consistently been one of the best teams on the defensive glass. I would also say, okay, you think it's Princeton. They're running the Princeton offense, so to speak, right? That's kind of you think of like the classic Ivy League offense, where there's a lot of cuts, there's a lot of ball movement. to kind of get, I don't know, open shots. And, if you bleed the clock before you get the open shot, you bleed the clock. But to find those open shots, whether it's from three or whether it's on cuts or finding an open passing lane. And I think what that means is KU's off-ball defense is going to be tested in this game. Like, I think back to like the Louisville exhibition, that would more so, I think, be on-ball defense would be tested. I think in the North Carolina game, your off-ball defense was tested a little bit more, and it didn't show up as well as the Louisville game, for instance. So that's where I think this game becomes interesting, is the off-ball defense for KU being tested a little more after it wasn't very good against Carolina. Can you improve against it and show improvement against Princeton? They do launch a lot of threes. Over 50% of their shot attempts are three balls in their 2D1 games, and they shot over 30 of them in that D2 game. So a lot of that's not the percentage, that's the amount of their shots. So more than, if they're taking two shots, at least one of them is from three. But what that means is if they get hot, they can hang around, right? If they're going to shoot a high percent or high volume of threes, if they're going to shoot 30 of them and they get hot and they go 12 of 30, this might be a game that you're kind of sweating out at the end, that you're up 6 at the under 4 minute mark, and then you have to pull away to win by 12, right? Like, if that's what they shoot from three, that's a distinct possibility. And then the other thing they do well is get to the free throw line. They are taking 24 and a half free throw attempts per game in the early going. Again, those are through their two Division I games. If we look at what they just did against John Jay, they got to the free throw line 17 times. So not as much as the first two, but they did convert them at a high rate at going 15 of 17. 4 weaknesses for Princeton. They do not score in transition. Now, I'd imagine without, seeing the number, they probably got some transition buckets against John Jay en route for, 100 points there. But in their first 2 games, their D1 games, they scored a total of 5 transition points. Kansas had like 17 transition points at the half against North Carolina, which was built on some of those turnovers. But like, point being, Princeton does not score in transition right now. So that's not something that I think is going to be tested too much by Kansas. Struggling inside. They, again, shot over 60% on twos against the D2 school, but in their 2 D1 games, just 43% total so far on 2-point shots. They are averaging just 18 paint points per game. That is only in the second percentile nationally. That means 98% of college basketball is better than them through a small sample size in scoring in the paint. And they're just 53% at the rim. That is bottom 5th in college basketball. They are just 2 of 13 in the floater range. They've really struggled inside against a lengthy Kansas team. You figure that could change, but if they do get those openings off cuts, that's where it does change in this one. So kind of both ways there. They do not get steals or forced turnovers so far, 344th in the country in steal rate. And they're outside the top 300 in turnover rate defense. And then I would say youth is the other thing here. They had an opportunity to be an older team, right? If Xavier Lee and I think it was Caden Pierce is the name of the other kid who's redshirting, who's a really good player. If they both came back, they'd have a couple more upperclassmen. Those would be 2 of the best players in the conference. Like, they'd have a real chance of being, honestly, like an 11 seed or something, like having a really special season and maybe even getting like an at-large bid. But those guys leave. You have 0 seniors on the roster. And of the 9 players with double-digit minutes played in the 2 D1 games, only 3 are even upperclassmen. So it is a young team overall with Princeton. What does that mean coming into, sometimes youth can be a good thing for that because you don't realize the magnitude of the moment and you're just going to launch up a bunch of threes and that could work in your favor. The flip side is if you're spooked a little as a young team by the environment of Allen Fieldhouse, then that becomes a problem for Princeton in this one. Players to watch. Let's start with the Kansas player to watch. That would be one, Flory Bidunga. Flory's been a little up and down so far this season. I want to see him be up in this matchup. I think it's going to test him on the defensive end because, again, you go back to the North Carolina game, and it's kind of testing KU's off-ball defense and what Flory can do as a backline protector for KU defensively. If Princeton's going to be, bringing the big man out to try to bring Flory out, if Princeton's going to be cutting around a bunch, doing a bunch of off-ball stuff, how can Flory help anchor the backline of the defense for KU? I think is going to be super interesting, but also knowing that Princeton has gotten to the foul line a good amount, can Flory avoid foul trouble? Because we've seen him in the Louisville game, he's in foul trouble. The Green Bay game, he picks up some fouls. In obviously earlier this week against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, he's in foul trouble with 3 fouls in the first half. So can he do all of those things? And then at the other end, with Princeton being such a good defensive rebounding team, what if his offensive rebounding ability is cut off? What does that do for his offense, right? So I think it's going to be a really interesting game for Flory Bidunga here. And then for Princeton, we're going to go with their guard, Darryn Davis. He was a second-team all-conference pick in the preseason by Under Basket Review after he put up 9 points per game last year on 35% from three. He was a solid player for them who was a little inconsistent once they got to conference play. But so far this year, 18 points per game in their 2 D1 games so far. He's been scoring at a high rate for Princeton so far. And in that most recent game against John Jay for the Tigers, Davis added 13 points, going 3 of 4 from three. He also had 5 assists. So he's a good player, good guard overall. And as I mentioned, just 0 seniors, 3 upperclassmen, and basically the rotation. He's one of them. He is a junior on this roster who can provide a little steadying level of play for them. So he's a good player and somebody to watch out for, Darryn Davis. All right, let's get to our keys to the game for the KU offense, KU defense, our player matchup of the game, Hawks to soar, all that and more. This is Locked on Jayhawks. And today's episode of LOJ is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can get in on the action for the KU Princeton game over on FanDuel, including being able to make your own same-game parlay. Plus, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets from everything on who's going to score next to who's going to make that fourth quarter comeback. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. We got a big weekend ahead, obviously KU football and bye week, but you got the Chiefs against the Broncos. There's some awesome college football games this weekend. Feels like the college basketball season is starting to ramp up. We've got a bunch of top 25 matchups coming through the rest of the week. KU's got Duke next week. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel.com, sign up, and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks again for joining us on the #1 sports podcast network, and thanks for making it your first listen every day here with Locked on Jayhawks. So we'll have a postcast of the game later on your Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening for KU against Princeton, and then we'll be back the following week with all sorts of Champions Classic, KU Duke content. We'll get into the KU Iowa State game for football as well. So busy week coming ahead here with Locked on Jayhawks. All right, keys to the game for KU against Princeton. The KU offense. I think get the ball down low. Princeton is in the 26th percentile in preventing shots at the rim. They are also below average in the percentage that they've held opponents to there. So there are going to be opportunities for KU to score on the inside, and that's where I look to Flory Bidunga, who's not the most pristine offensive player out there, who does have at least a little bit, like it's more than like Ernest Uday had, for instance, at Kansas on the block, but it's not quite Hunter Dickinson, for instance. What can he give for KU against Princeton? And then can the guards, find lanes to the rim and get some easy buckets for KU? Can we see Melvin Council do that a little bit more? Can we see Marco Jackson do that a little bit more? But Kansas does have a size advantage. Princeton does have a 6'8" freshman. He's played 44 minutes. They've got a 6'8" junior who's played 41. These are the 2 D1 games. 6'7" forward who's played 37. He grades out as a really good defender and just had a good game in the D2 game scoring. And then they've got a 6'9" sophomore at 33 minutes. So it's solid size, but it's not like huge size, right? They don't have like a big behemoth or two. And overall, they're below average nationally or around average nationally in blocking shots. I want to see Kansas pound the rock inside. I want to see the big men score buckets on the inside. I think they should be able to do that. But it'll be interesting. Does Princeton pack the paint and say, hey, Kansas, we're going to try to make you beat us from the outside? Early on, KU's actually shot well from three, so I don't know if they'll do that or not, but that is something that I would be doing if I were facing this Kansas team, especially if Darryn Peterson's out, right? Okay, KU defense. I think the key for them is guarding cuts and above the break threes. As far as the cuts, we go back to the Princeton offense. They're going to be moving off ball. We saw KU struggle off ball, pick and roll, right? Setting screens, and then guys roll into the basket, getting easy buckets. It's going to be a little different than that, but there will be certain things that'll be similar to that. And if Kansas can't defend off ball or on cuts, they are going to get beat up a little bit by Princeton, but if they can do a good job at that, I think it would show real growth for this defense. Beyond that, we know that Princeton, over half of their shots come from three, and they're at over 35% on above the break threes so far this season, which has accounted for 43% of their shot attempts. So basically 2 out of every 5 of their field goal attempts are above the break threes, and they're shooting them at a good percentage at 35%. Specifically, look out for Jackson Hickey. He is 4 for 7 in that zone. Dalen Davis, who we mentioned earlier, is 3 for 9. Jack Stanton is 3 for 10. But that's an area you have to guard kind of at the top, which means, if they're coming off a pick and roll at the top of the arc, you got to go over there, right? Because they'll gladly shoot it. But maybe a little more emphasis on the above the break threes than the corner threes in this game. Our player matchup, we're going to go with Dalen Davis versus Melvin Council. So Davis, who we mentioned earlier, he's in the 96th percentile for usage rate right now. That means he is handling the ball. He is taking a lot of shots. He is doing a lot for Princeton at this point in time. He is the everything for the offense. And if he has a good game, that's going to be great for Princeton. But here's where Melvin Council can make a huge impact. Like, part of me putting Melvin Council here is that I do want to see him eventually have a good offensive game. And I'd love to see that in this one. I'd love to see, a 3-point shot go down, for instance, for Council. But from a defensive perspective, Melvin Council, what he did to Michael Brown in the Louisville game, and Brown has just completely gone off ever since then, I think certainly stands out to me as the opportunity of Council to be kind of a game-wrecking guard on the defensive end. This would be a moment where he has an opportunity to do just that. If he is a game-wrecking guard on the defensive end and makes Davis have a high turnover game or a very low efficiency shooting game or whatever it is, or combination of the two, I think it's going to be really, really hard for Princeton. I mean, it's going to be hard for Princeton regardless. They're going to come in as over a 20-point underdog, I would imagine, or somewhere around there, and being on the road and stuff like that. But that would make it very, 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 very difficult. So I want to see that matchup, because that is one of the ways Princeton, hangs around, so to speak. It is, like I said, an 8-point game at the under 4 mark or whatever it is, right? That he wins those matchups. But if Council is a game record defensively, I think it's going to be really hard for Princeton to win his offense, because Davis is one of the few guys who can kind of, create his own shot and beat you off the bounce. Okay, Hawks the sore in this one. Princeton gives up a fair amount of shots at the rim, and they've also allowed a bunch of shots above the break from 3. They are in the 4th percentile in preventing those, so to speak. There's been a heavy diet of teams shooting threes above the break on them. Darryn Peterson's 5 for 11 on such threes so far. Is he going to play? If he does, then that would be somebody to circle, but you'd probably circle Peterson regardless. Trey White's 3 for 6 there. Maybe this is a game for Trey White. Then again, Princeton's best defender is probably going to be guarding him. And then Kohl Rosario is 3 for 9 on such situations. Just had a good breakout. So maybe I'd go with a follow-up game for Kohl Rosario. I will say Melvin Council, as we try to, can he make a 3? He is over on those above the break 3 so far. And then the other one would be just a 5-man spot for KU. So whether it's Flory, whether it's Tiller, whether it's Mbia, Akron's starting 5 had 16 points, 6 rebounds in just 20 minutes on 4 of 5 shooting against Princeton. So really carved them up. And then Bucknell's starting 5 is a freshman. He had 12 points, 7 rebounds. He did have 7 turnovers. That'll be something to, are they doubling the post, causing turnovers? But I think there's going to be an opportunity for whatever big man for KU to score in this game down low on Princeton. And then I'll go with Kohl Rosario as the other one. Darryn Peterson, if he plays. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. Don't forget to check out, we did a signing day episode talking about KU's signees for the class of 2026. We did a little football episode where we talked about what is causing KU's late game struggles, and we've got plenty more content that you can check out anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll see you next time with LOJ.